We can sit around in the alternative media and we can moan about the fact that listings in Google are constantly being manipulated through algorithms, or we can do something about it.
Hello, and tonight's headlines.
The Iconic Media Group is a genuine alternative.
I never fully switch off. It's almost like having the radio on in the background.
What is the reaction to that from within the industry?
Well, I hide a lot.
Hello, welcome to Real Education with Lana.
However, we want to grow this into being one of the biggest independent platforms, if not the biggest independent platform in the world.
I brought in Max Egan to talk about it. Mr. Egan, no need for introductions, but I've done it anyway. Say hello to Iconic.
And welcome to the very first episode of Amanda's Secret Chamber.
I failed to know what pain feels like. It's horrible to suffer mentally because everything's here. It's just in here.
This gives the strong impression that we know what we're talking about.
I want to leave this world having made the biggest difference I can.
A genuine alternative that will cast a light on subjects that the mainstream media, and to be fair, large swathes of the alternative media, either can't or won't.
So many people have demanded that we ask David Icke to come back on the channel. It's blown me away, the amount of views, the amount of comments, the questions that have come in on back of the first podcast we did, Conspiracy Crimes of the Illuminati. If you've not seen that one yet, it's in the description box below the video. So David has come up to the Guildford studio. Before the summer holidays, he gave me his book, The Trigger. Now, this is 900 pages long. In terms of audiobooks, you could probably get about 30 hours of audiobook content out of this. So the depth in which he goes into this, I read it over the summer. We can't possibly, within a podcast, we can only do a fraction of what he's wrote. So I urge people who want to learn more, this is available worldwide on Amazon.
DavidIcke.com as well.
And DavidIcke.com as well.
Save giving Amazon the money.
Okay, so go down to the description box below this video and buy it from DavidIcke.com if you don't want to fund Amazon's. I think that guy bought, when I was on holiday, I saw a yacht that guy allegedly had bought called the Flying Fox. It was like a $500 million thing. Bezos is his name, Bezos. So the structure of today's podcast is, I have written notes throughout this book, and I've got things that I think are going to be perhaps the most interest to the people who've subscribed to the channel. But before we get to this content, I've just got to ask David, because it's the biggest news in the world right now, and maybe we can use this discussion to move over to this, because there is a parallel in the people behind this and the people what I'm going to ask is, David, what on earth did you think of Prince Andrew's BBC interview?
Well, it was always going to be a disaster for a simple reason. When you're not telling the truth and you cannot explain yourself in a way that isn't sinister, then you have to lie. And if you lie, especially in this situation, then your lies better be pretty damn bloody good, and you better be pretty damn bloody bright. And unfortunately for him, neither of those is true. And therefore, it's clear that he has no defense from what he's accused of. I mean, once we are into situations where the defense from having sex with an underage girl is not sweating, not going out in London without a shirt and tie, and going to a pizza restaurant, I mean, it's crazy. And that's an interesting point, which some people have made. These people don't go anywhere in public without a security operation, which logs the movements. So if Prince Andrew can account for his movements to prove that what's said is not true, then in that BBC interview, he would have said, well, just hold on a second. Here's the logs. But of course he didn't, because they're not there. And we saw the Queen, apparently Prince Charles, as well. Maybe he got advised by Jimmy Savile from the Great Beyond. Sorry, the Great Beyond. To cut Andrew off, gone, no more royal duties. And that was an attempt to stop a domino falling and start smacking the whole row of them down until we get deep into what the royal family is really involved in and how it connects into the same web that basically was responsible for 9/11. Not saying the royal family were involved in that, but the web they're connected to absolutely was. And so it's an attempt to stop the hemorrhage. And of course, what the media do is they'll go so far, usually overwhelmingly, and then they'll stop. I do feel that if this continues to gain momentum, it's one of the biggest threats to the royal family in a very, very long time, because so much is there to come out.
I'd like to explore this a bit more, but one of the things that you raised was the visit to the Pizza Express in Woking. So we were there earlier this week, and we filmed in there. And Andrew said, couldn't possibly have been with the alleged victim because I was at Pizza Express in Woking at 5 p.m. Well, Pizza Express in Woking closes at 10:30.
Exactly.
10:30 is when Tramps opens.
Yeah, that's exactly the point I made myself on my website. The time he's saying he was there was not the time he was supposed to be at Tramps. So there's desperation, big time, written all over it. So he's in desperate trouble, and because he is, this is why the royal family are trying to cut and run and hope it will go away. But, I've just mentioned it. You can, because the media do, mainstream media, but you cannot take the Andrew situation with Epstein in isolation from the royal family, Prince Charles in particular, connection to Jimmy Savile. So just let's take a breath and look at it again. We have a single family operating out of London, and somehow one of them gets involved with a major paedophile and procurer of children for the rich and famous in the United States and further afield. And another one gets involved for decades as a close friend of Jimmy Savile in this country, who was a historic level paedophile and procurer of children for the rich and famous. Just a coincidence, nothing to worry about. Are you having a laugh? But this is the whole thing, Just look. I mean, Savile was an inner bosom buddy of the inner circle of the royal family for decades. Brought in there. This is another coincidence, by the way. Nothing to worry about. In the 1960s, in his own words, by Lord Mountbatten, who I've been pointing out for a long time was a paedophile. And of course, this year a book came out using information from Freedom of Information requests to the FBI, where at the FBI documents we're talking about Mountbatten being a paedophile. So a paedophile takes a historic paedophile into the royal family, becomes a decades-long friend of Prince Charles, and the same family then have another brother, Prince Andrew, who gets involved in one of the actually most high-profile paedophiles and procurers of children in America. And we're supposed to think this is all a coincidence. What it does is take us further down the road to what I've been saying in my book since the 1990s, which is the royal family are big time into paedophile rings and into satanic rings, and they connect for reasons I explain in the books. So it's like you're on the cusp. You're on the cusp, or another analogy, the finger's in the dike, but it's starting to rumble, and we'll see if it comes down. But if it does, and the real truth comes out, then the royal family will be no more.
So Prince Andrew has been isolated now, according to the tabloids, by Prince Charles and Prince Philip. They've put their foot down on him.
Oh, yeah.
Kicked him out the palace.
Oh, of course, they would want to.
Is he finished, Andrew?
I can't see how we can recover from this. Once you have cut somebody off in terms of royal duties because he can't explain a relationship with a horrific paedophile and procurer of children and trafficker of children, unless at some point he can say, here's the proof, I didn't know anything about it, which ain't going to come. I can't see how you can justify saying, okay, it's long enough now, come back. Because don't think people would have it.
So in a criminal case, the first thing your lawyer tells you is don't speak to the media, don't speak to the police. Anything the police ask, refer them to me. So he went out, blabbed his mouth off to the BBC, said all these lies and inconsistencies. I imagine the FBI is going to be poring over that right now. But at head of the federal law and order position is William Barr. Do you think it's possible that they will give Andrew a pass? Because I noticed that Trump and the Queen are about to meet. So this could be some kind of power play by Trump.
Yeah, and also, as I was reading recently, Barr's come out and said all those inconsistencies regarding the death of Epstein, they were just a series of basically, things that just happened, and it was just not a conspiracy. So that don't give you a lot of confidence, does it? And the other thing is, you see, what which relates to this, what has been done in terms of the Queen cutting off Andrew is kind of presented as the Queen acting decisively because of things that Andrew was possibly involved in and all that stuff. In other words, the Queen kind of cares. You mustn't have done this. You shouldn't have done this and all this stuff. No. What she's saying is, Andrew, you shouldn't have got caught, right? Which is a very different thing. Because you'll remember that recently an ABC television anchor, what we call a presenter or news presenter, was on a live mic being filmed, but it wasn't for air. She was talking to people in the gallery, I think. And it was leaked to Project Veritas. And she described that she had the Epstein story 3 years earlier. And she had Clinton, she had Prince Andrew and all this. And ABC wouldn't air it. And one of the reasons, she says in this leaked video, was threats from the royal family. So the royal family couldn't give a damn about abused kids. They give a damn about getting caught being involved with them. And so the whole royal farce is just it's in your face, but people just, certainly the media won't go far enough for the whole house of cards to come down. And even on another level, we're heading towards 2020, and we have a situation in Britain and Commonwealth countries too, Canada and Australia, New Zealand, where the head of state is chosen from a single family, i.e. bloodline, that very short time ago came out of Germany, and the succession of who becomes head of state is decided by who had sex with who in what order. I mean, hello. If British people or the nation as a whole wants to have any self-respect, that has to stop. I mean, you have sports teams and crowds and all these different occasions where people are singing the national anthem, but it's not. It's not an anthem to the country. It's an anthem to a woman, to a monarch, in which they actually demand in this anthem to be reigned over by this woman. And, it's insane. It's absolute madness. And that's if they were the nicest family in human history. Given that they are not quite that, to say the very least, it makes it even more crazy that we have this whole institution, which is vampiring money off the population while kids go to bed hungry in this country.
You've mentioned Andrew and Epstein. You've mentioned Charles and Savile. Is there a history going further back of the royals and paedophilia?
Well, in some of my books, I picked up these bloodlines that became known as royalty. And you can chart them through history, and you can find child abuse, paedophilia, and you can find human sacrifice. What is royalty? Why is it someone's genetics that decides they will be head of state in a country, or absolutely 100% dictatorially control countries for a long, long time? It's because they claim that their bloodline is special. Why do they call the aristocracy blue bloods as opposed to what everyone else is like? Why do these families incessantly interbreed all the way through the ages? Not out of love and attraction overwhelmingly, but because of bloodline. Why, when these same bloodlines, apart from a few left now that we still call royal, like the Windsors or the House of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha, as it really is, German house of royal house, why, when a lot of these bloodlines moved into the dark suit professions and took over banking and business and politics and all these other institutions, media ownership, why do they also incessantly interbreed with each other as well? Why do we have Eastern establishment families of the United States who interbreed with each other? Because there is a particular genetics, I call it hybrid genetics, and it's what was referred to at one point as the bloodlines of the gods. And because there is these hybrid bloodlines, part human, part non-human, which goes back, I'd say, to the Bible, but the same story is everywhere in ancient cultures. In the biblical version of it is the sons of God who interbred with the daughters of men and all that stuff. It's this hybrid genetics, actually hybrid information fields, if you get deeper into reality, that is the core of why they think they're special and above the rest of the population. This is why they won't, in any way where the royal title or the royal rulership will be inherited, do they interbreed with what are called commoners. I mean, you see Kate Middleton. She was described when she married William as a commoner. Then a few Burke's Peerage type people who look into these aristocratic backgrounds and bloodlines, they did a bit of research into Kate Middleton and found she came from a blue blood background. So, which didn't surprise me, to say the least. So there is a history, not just of the bloodline, which for a long time was called royal in terms of Windsor still is, but also of this paedophilia, Satanism, because, when they talk about the ancients sacrificing children to the gods, or what's the term, sacrificing young virgins, children, to the gods, these gods, this non-human force that's actually behind human events. I don't care if people say, David Icke, mate. I don't care. I don't give a shit, mate. Just look at the evidence. These gods are these non-human entities that operate outside of human sight, which of course is very narrow, human sight. We can see hardly anything. And it's that gods interbreeding connection which created royalty and created aristocracy. That's why they see themselves as better than us.
We had a guest on recently, David Macmillan. He's coming tonight, actually. And at the end of the conversation, he believes that the infinite improbability of that mitochondria existing on Earth just out of itself. There wasn't enough time looking at the probabilities. It must have come from somewhere else. Is that something that you've looked at?
Oh, I've been writing about it for the best part of 30 years. It's very clear that humanity is being manipulated generation after generation into what I might call a perceptual bubble. Perceptions are everything. What you perceive is how you behave. It's everything. It's your perceptions, i.e. what I would say programming, because if you look at a human life, you come out of the womb and you hit parental programming, which is not through malevolence, but the parents have been through what you're about to go through and bought it, so they pass that programming on to you. You hit the education system at an ever earlier age, and now throughout your formative years, you've got representatives of the state who are giving you the state's version of everything all the way through your formative years. The media is pounding the same version of reality at you. Science is telling you that, apart from quantum physics. Medicine's telling you that, et cetera, et cetera. And then you've got peer pressure around you that's been through the same programming of perception and accepted it and believed it. And they give you a hard time if you have a different perception to what they've been programmed to have. And basically, we've got a situation where from cradle to grave, a human life is a perceptual download to hold us in a narrow band of perception, which I call the postage stamp consensus. And this consensus waves away any idea that reality, as mainstream science tells us, ludicrous, is not true. That there can be any manipulation of human society by a non-human force we can't see, because most people think, well, why can't we see them? You know, I can see everything there is to see in the space I'm looking at. When in truth, what we call visual reality is a tiny, tiny, ludicrously narrow band called visible light, and all the perceptual download holds us in this narrow band of sense of the possible. And it puts people in bubbles. People are breaking out of them now more and more, but most people are still in this bubble. And this bubble has a reflex action response to anything that is not in the perceptual range of the bubble. So when people like me come out and say, blah, 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 we're being manipulated by a non-human force, the bubble reaction is, you're mad. But the bubble also has a protection mechanism which plays out in one sense, that they won't then go and look at the books and say, well, okay, how's this guy justifying this? No. One line. And this is why you get in the media. David Icke says we're ruled by 6-foot lizards. Or is it 7-foot lizards or 8-foot lizards or whatever? And that's where it stops. Oh, he says we're ruled by lizards. He's got to be mad. This is how the perception thing works. And what I'm saying is when you study it deeply, these perceptual bubbles constantly are underpinned by what we call the education system, by the media and all that stuff. And journalists, where do they judge report the world from and observe the world from? The bubble, because they've been through the same perceptual download as everyone else. It's the blind leading the bloody blind, really. And so we have this situation where you've got this perceptual, these perceptual tram lines, and it's been done systematically. They don't want us to know the true nature of reality. They don't want us to know the true nature of history, because if we did, then the pennies would start to drop on why human society is as it is, and how mysteries can be explained with perfect, simple logic once you realize what reality is as opposed to what we're told it is. So I'll give you a quick example of that. When I say that these bloodlines we're talking about, the most the most inner core of them, have the ability to move between human and non-human form, immediately bubble perception says, that's crazy, impossible. He's mad. So why is that then? Well, you can't have a solid body change into another form and back again. No, you can't. But the body is not solid. It's a hologram, illusory solidity. And we're told that the body is made of atoms. We're told this wall is made of atoms. Atoms have no solidity. They're basically nothing's empty space, but what appears to be just empty space. There's no solidity. And atoms that aren't solid can't make a solid wall, and they can't make a solid body. This reality in its base form is waveform information. Think Wi-Fi. Just think Wi-Fi. And we decode that information into the world holographic, not physical, that we think is the world we're experiencing. And you can produce a very simple analogy for that. In this room, if there's Wi-Fi in this room, I take it there is, where is it? Where is the Wi-Fi? Well, I can't see it, so it can't exist. But you know Wi-Fi exists, don't you? Well, how do you know? Because you get a computer, and a computer decodes Wi-Fi radiation waveform fields into a completely different form on the screen of the computer. And that's what's happening all the time. The World Wide Web is in this room. A computer, and that which programs the computer, decides what part of that World Wide Web it puts on the screen. This is what we're doing. So you have waveform. The body is a waveform information field. It's fluid. It's not solid. And these, take first a human energetic field. A human energetic information field, which we then decode into apparent solidity, holographic. And you can just take the way the five senses work to explain that. What do the five senses do? Take the ear, the tongue, anything. They take waveform information, the ears in terms of sound. They turn it into electrical information, same information, different form. They communicate it to the brain, and then the brain decodes it into the form that we think is external to us, but is actually inside us, like the internet is inside the computer. We see it on the screen, but it's inside the computer. So if it's a human energetic field, that information field is the information we decode into what appears to be a human, like I'm decoding your field now. But these hybrids are dual information fields. When I say they're hybrids, yes, genetically they're hybrid, but what is genetics? It's the holographic expression, decoded expression of the waveform level of the body. So there's dual information fields. So you're not, but let's just take it as an example. You're the queen. Or one of these bloodlines. Oh, don't start a Christmas broadcast, mate, for goodness sake. And you are projecting, as you do all the time in public.
You must kneel before me, David.
Oh, that'll be the bloody day, Sean. I can call you Sean, can I, Mom? And therefore, I'm decoding your human field. But in the rituals, I've talked to so many people all over the world who've seen this happen with different, very famous people, including the royals. There's a shift in the field. So suddenly, the other field becomes the dominant one. Now I'm observing you. I'm no longer decoding your human field. I'm now decoding the non-human field. Now, in my decoding perception, you have just physically shifted from physically human to physically non-human, but that's not what's happened. Your information field, fluid, not solid, has shifted, and I'm now decoding a different field to what I was decoding before, and thus you appear to have shape shifted physically, but there is no physical, so you haven't done that. And again, if this is not explained, and it isn't, except in the books, then people, and they do this across a great spectrum of subjects, they'll wave away things that can be supported by the evidence without further research, simply because the bubble perception says that's ridiculous. And if we are going to turn this world around, people have to take their perceptions back and realize that the world they think they've been experiencing all their lives ain't the one they're actually experiencing. And once you realize how this reality really works, then you start to understand that this cabal, what I call the death cult, it knows that. It knows how we decode reality. It knows that we decode reality and experience reality as a result of the perceptions we have. Thus, not only can they get people to believe things, but through the beliefs they get people to accept and to believe are real, they're also dictating people's experience. And the whole thing is a perceptual trick, a perceptual magic trick. Now, where do we get our perceptions from? We get them from information received. We get them from a personal experience, that's information. We get them from the 10 o'clock news. We get them off a Facebook post. We get them off a radio station or whatever. And from that information, we form our perceptions, which then become our behavior and responses. So who controls information overwhelmingly controls mass perception. And this is why this death cult controls the media. It controls Silicon Valley. This is what all the censorship now is all about through the Silicon Valley corporations, which I say are death cult corporations. It's to stop other information being received by people, to challenge the official narratives of everything, and in challenging them, as we've both seen the power of it, to change perception as a result of having an access to a different perspective and source of information. They're trying to cut that off. It's what it's all about. And this is why, to an extent, the mainstream media will go so far, because it has to maintain any credibility, like the Epstein thing. But it stops. It stops before the finger comes out the dike. And so you see a big, Epstein this, Epstein that, Epstein, boom. And that's what we've seen. And so much of it's been cut off. And if it wasn't for the Andrew angle, then we'd be hardly hearing much about Epstein compared with what there is to come out now.
You completely reignited it. I've got two things to say to the viewers, and I've got two following questions from there. First thing to the viewers then, David talked about this postage stamp confinement of viewpoints, and if you go outside of it, you get censored. So my channel and David's channel, people are getting unsubscribed. We're getting shadow banned on our videos, and we're getting demonetized left and right. So if you are watching this content and you are enjoying it, it is free to subscribe to our channels. All the links for David's socials and his channel and his book, all of his books, are in the description box below this video. And at the bottom right-hand corner of this video, you can click over and subscribe to my channel as well. We're also hoping that David will get on the Joe Rogan podcast. So if people out there, I know a lot of people who watch my YouTube videos also watch Joe Rogan videos. Start sending messages in to Joe Rogan requesting that David gets on the Joe Rogan podcast. And I know if enough people do that, he's going to start paying attention. I think it would be an absolutely mind-blowing interview. The most watched interview on Joe Rogan, I believe, is Alex Jones one. So, you know, they love conspiracies, that audience. It would be absolutely massive. Now, the next thing, you know, people have tried to discredit David, you know, saying that he's, you know, reptilian lizards are just bouncing around the royal palace, and how can you listen to this guy? He's a complete nut job. Now, on what he said about the change in consciousness and brain chemistry, I witnessed that. You know, I served almost 6 years in Arizona prison. I live with some murderers and some psychopaths. And they could be so charming on some days, just like Ted Bundy charming the judge. You've all saw it on Netflix. And then on other days, their brain chemistry would change and their eyes would be like little pinholes or big. And you could just feel that dark, dangerous energy coming off them. And as a normal person, just feeling that energy field, it's frightening. It raises the hairs on your arms. So there are people out there whose brains are built differently from the average people. And these are psychopaths. And I've lived with them. I've experienced that energy field change. And David's exactly right. Now, to get to the top of politics, to get to the top of business, a lot of those people have got those traits as well. They're absolute psychopaths. So just to go on to the two further questions now from what David just said. First question is, with the bloodlines of the Illuminati, is there one dominant bloodline or are there multiple bloodlines competing and that's what creates world wars?
Well, if I could just say one quick thing very quickly from what you just said.
Yeah.
What you've just described is basically possession. Because, as I've just been talking about, the base form of the body is waveform. These entities operating outside of human sight, some of them not far, also have a waveform pattern, right? That's their energetic field, their information field. What happens with possession is that field starts to, it's called wave entanglement scientifically, where the waves connect. If you throw two pebbles in a pond and the waves come out and then they collide with each other, that pattern is called entanglement. So the waves of the possessing entity entangle with the waves of the body, mind of the person being possessed. And it can be done mildly in the sense that it will affect the person's perceptions and behavior. But when that possessing entity's field entangles massively with the possessed person's field, what happens is the information field of the person starts to be infused more and more with the information field of the possessing entity. And that's when faces start to change, like the Exorcist movie type. I've seen it. I've bloody seen it, where people's faces just change. It's because I'm decoding the possessed person's field before they're possessed. I see a human. And then the possessed entity starts to get a grip and infuse its information field into the person. Now that person's hologram is starting to shift because it's based on a different information source now. And so I see a person apparently face shifting. Now, one of the things I've talked about in the books, which is absolutely what you've just described, is that often these entities will they'll connect with someone, but then they'll kind of stay in the background. And when they're in the background, you would describe them as you have nice people. They're lovely people. But then when the entity wants to impose itself upon that person, then they become a completely different personality because this possessing entity is a frickin' psychopath. That's why that which is possessed becomes psychopathic. And basically these bloodlines and these hybrid bloodlines, it's a form of possession, really. And so people you'll name people in the books about what they're doing. And people will say to you, I met him, he was a lovely bloke. Well, yeah, I'm sure he was. But I wonder what you think if you saw him in the ritual. You know what I mean? Not the same people. So these things can be explained, but only once we let go that the world is solid and physical. Because while we hold on to that, which quantum physics has long shown not to be true, then what is happening cannot be explained. And mainstream science, as opposed to things like quantum physics and that whole area of beyond physical research, mainstream science says about so many things, well, we can't explain that. Well, the reason they can't explain that is they're coming from the world is solid, and they'll never explain it. Once they realize it's not and how reality really is, these mysteries, oh, it's a mystery. God, how do you explain? Doddle. I left school at 15. Never passed a major exam in my life. Never mind university. Played for Oxford United for 3 months, as near as I got to university. Because you don't need a scientific mind to understand the world. You do not need an academic mind to understand the world. You need an open one. And when you open to information as it exists, rather than stay on the postage stamp and ignore that, then you start to see the world as it is. While famous professors and academics are saying, we don't understand this at all, or they're saying that's not possible. No. Don't confuse the limits of your mind with the limits of possibility. They're not the same thing.
So Hitler was obsessed with Germanic history and bloodlines. Is it the competition between the Illuminati bloodlines that causes World War?
You think of a pyramid. You got the top of the pyramid. That's where it's all coming from. As you come down the pyramid, you will start to get competition and what have you. But this will knock heads together if it starts to get in the way of the agenda for humanity, which is complete control, not least through artificial intelligence. And you see, you can see a war from a public point of view and from a participant's point of view as a really bad thing. But a war to this death cult is A, mass death ritual, and B, the greatest way to change a world, a country, a situation irreversibly is a war. You know, the world was not the same place after World War I, even more not the same place after World War II. And what was happening as these wars unfolded? Power was being centralized. And if there's a few of you and you want to control the many, you must centralize power, eventually on a global level. So these wars are of benefit to this cabal because with every one of them, they are irreversibly changing society. You look at all the centralization of global institutions, whether it's the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, they came in the wake of World War II. So it's something I call it's a process, creative destruction, where you have a war, you completely change the status quo. Then you have another war and you change it even more. And then you have another war and you change it even more. And what you're doing with each change of status quo is you're moving closer and closer to your ultimate goal, which is global centralization of power over every area of people's lives. And this is the goal of this cabal. And one of the massive central ways that they're seeking to achieve that now is the hoax of human-caused global warming. When I was writing in the 90s about global warming being a hoax, people, caused by humans, climate's always changing. People said, well, why would they do that? And I said, because they are going to say we have to centralize power over the fine detail of your life to save the planet. That's what's coming. And where are we? That's exactly what's happening. We have the Green New Deal with the Democrats in America through this lady, Ocasio-Cortez, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, this New York congresswoman. We have Extinction Rebellion in this country and around the world. And what they're calling for is precisely what I said would be the excuse of introducing as a result of selling the hoax of human-caused global warming. And it's kind of interesting, there is a year that keeps being repeated, and it's 2030. If you look at a United Nations agenda, which is using the threat of global warming, climate change, to justify centralized control of everything. It's called Agenda 2030. It used to be called Agenda 2021, was it? But it's now called Agenda 2030. Ray Kurzweil, a Google executive, says that by 2030, they want to be connecting the human brain to artificial intelligence. And if you look at what people like Extinction Rebellion and Ocasio-Cortez and all these people, the climate cultists, I call it, around the world, they're saying we have a certain period of time to save the planet from destruction. That time they say we have takes us to 2030. Now, none of these things are unconnected because the end game is connecting the human mind to artificial intelligence. So artificial intelligence, or whoever controls it, becomes the human mind in totality.
If you've not seen David's work on climate change, in the first podcast we did, we've got a good segment. There is an actual David Icke playlist now on my channel, all the different clips, or you can go over to David's channel and there's just tons over there. But one of the things that we didn't touch on in the first podcast, you mentioned how the bloodlines are operating on this frequency that they try and keep us from tapping into it, dumbed down. We've seen across the country, some areas of the country are rebelling now against the introduction of the new telephone technology, 4G, 5G, whatever
5G.
it is. Is that to disturb our DNA and keep us... What's your interpretation of that?
Again, we come back to what I said earlier. Once you understand what reality is, once you understand what the body actually is in its base form, a waveform information field, think Wi-Fi, then the reasons for things happening in the world of the scene take on a completely different look, different reason for why it's happening. So just look at the body. The body is a waveform field. And it's vibrating, oscillating, right? Now, when that oscillation stops, that's what we call death of the body. But there is an optimum oscillation which expresses itself in the hologram as health, psychological health, quote, physical health. Anything that affects that oscillation in terms of its optimum state is going to have in the hologram, of which it is the information base, a problem. It's going to be a psychological problem, or it's going to be a quote, physical problem. And we are now being bombarded with technological frequencies, 5G is the new one, that are bombarding our oscillating waveform field with frequencies that are creating increasing disturbances within it. And therefore, we are seeing the, quote, physical health consequences of this electromagnetic soup that we're now living in, that is getting more dense all the time. And of course, the brain communicates and processes information through electricity and frequency. It communicates with the body electrically, and any frequencies that disturb the harmony of that processing are going to have bodily health and psychological effects. Now, 5G is a weapon. It's used by law enforcement in America and the military to scatter crowds. They fire a frequency from these big trucks at a crowd they want to disperse. And you see, the body is an antenna. DNA is an antenna. The skin is an antenna. We are antennas. That's what we are. We are interacting, receiving and transmitting frequencies of information all the time. And what happens with this 5G range crowd scattering technology is the skin picks it up and decodes it as the skin feeling as if it's on fire. And people run so that they get out of the frequency range so their skin doesn't seem as if it's burning. This is the stuff, this is the frequency range they want to smack out. Okay, it won't have that effect, all the time, of course not. But in less than that range of power, it will have enormous potential impact on people's health and on their psychological state. Because it doesn't go through dense objects very well, 5G, it means they want antenna boxes all the way down the streets pumping this out. And this is the other point. The goal, the end game, is what they call a smart grid. This is why all this technology, almost everything comes out now, not even just technology, but ways of doing things, is called smart. And whether it's a way of doing something, or whether it's technology, if it's got smart in it, they're all connected to this smart grid. And the smart grid is going to be, it's unfolding all the time, based on the internet. This is what the Internet of Things is all about. We're connecting all these technologies, everything basically, to the internet. This is all part of this smart grid. And the idea is, as people like Kurzweil at Google are openly saying, why is he openly saying it? Because the sales pitch is, if we allow our brains to be connected to artificial intelligence, we'll become superhuman. We won't. We'll become post-human and subhuman. That's the idea. And he's openly saying that once the AI is connected to the brain, human thinking will do less and less, as we call human thinking, and AI will think more until human thinking as we know it is virtually negligible. We'll have been assimilated into AI, basically. That's the idea. And if people think that's far out, they don't understand the scale of psychopathy that we're dealing with in terms of the mindset behind all this, which, like I say, goes off planet. And out of this reality. So you have a situation where this smart grid is planned to be connected to the human brain for everything you call technology being connected to this grid, and for the grid to be driven, including the human mind, by artificial intelligence. And as I've said in my books, I keep hearing about artificial intelligence this, artificial intelligence that. I never hear anyone ask, what is artificial intelligence? What is it? And I'll give you a what if, and I say it's absolutely massively more than a what if. What if artificial intelligence, I'm not talking about algorithmic AI, I'm talking about the deep AI. What if that level of AI was this non-human force? Connecting AI to the human brain becomes the vehicle for that force to literally assimilate the human mind, collectively and individually. I say that's what's happening. But I'm mad, so, just go and make a cup of tea. But this is the idea, this grid. And the idea is that everything is connected to this grid. Now, if you're going to do that, this grid communication system has to cover every inch of the planet, bar none. What's the only way you can do that? From satellite. And here we have now Elon Musk. He's been on the Rogan show. I don't know why Rogan won't have me on when I talk about all the subjects that he talks about and more, or he discusses in his interviews and more. And I don't understand why RT won't have me on when I've been discussing all the stories they talk about for decades. I was interviewed by RT, very quickly, I was interviewed by RT out of nowhere. They came along and said, we want to talk to you. So I talked to them for about 2 hours. They were very nice. And they said, we're going to run it about 2 days. We're going to aim it for 2 days. It was 2.5 months ago. Never seen the light of day. So maybe it will one day. But you see what I mean? There's a line, if you cross it, then a postage stamp line. Some people might have a wider postage stamp line, but there's still a line. And if you cross that, then we're not having him on, that sort of thing. But what I was saying is Elon Musk, he's the man that said AI could be the end of humanity, if you remember. Well, he then created a company called Neuralink to connect the human brain to computers. And he's the one who is sending up with his SpaceX operation the satellites that are beaming Wi-Fi and 5G back at the Earth to create the all-encompassing web on which AI control of humanity is dependent. And the reason that they're rolling out 5G so fast without testing, without independent testing, and they've admitted that, they've spent no money on independent testing. The reason they're doing it is because this smart grid to work has to have at least 5G level of communication power. It's essential. So if you had independent research, some people have done it, not through the industry, but themselves, and found, oh my God, this is absolutely lethal. The reason they're not doing it officially is because if people knew what 5G was and what it could do, then, people, the public as a whole, they would, there would be a riot. And so they want to keep that from people so that this smart grid can happen, because without 5G or higher, and in China they're talking about 6G now, this smart grid can't work.
So if we're bathing in Wi-Fi, 5G, microwave radiation, how lethal is it? Is it cancerous?
Oh, well, yes, because you see, you've got this waveform field, and if it's in a state of balance, you are mentally and, quote, physically healthy. When it's knocked out of balance, then you are ill in some way. You have a dis-ease, disharmony in the field, and that will express itself in some kind of psychological or bodily problem. And I talked earlier about the brain is constantly communicating, and the body itself and the cells and all the different expressions of the body are communicating with each other all the time, and cells are replenished through that communication system. If you've got something that is interfering with that communication system, it's going to go out of kilter. And when that happens, one thing that happens is that cell replacement goes out of kilter, and that's what we call cancer. Or cell health goes out of kilter. We call it cancer.
How is it being stopped then in some areas of the country? How can people take action against this?
Well, the only thing that people can do is to research information about it and then pass it on to every person they can possibly imagine. People say nothing I can do. Well, there's phone-ins on radio stations all over the country all the time. Call in. Yes, the usual idiot with a microphone might have a go at you, but so what? Someone having a go at you is more important than getting this out. Because one thing I've learned over 30 years, people cannot unhear something. It's so important. People said to me when I started coming out with all this stuff a long time ago, didn't you know people would laugh at you when you said that? And I thought, I'd work that out. But the point is, if I feel it's valid, it will eventually be shown to be so. And if I don't say it now, because what will people think about me, it will never be shown to be so, because I'd never have said it. So people need to chill out about whether people will have a go at them or laugh at them. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. We get to a point, right? We get to a point where people are connected to AI. They have no individual thought or emotional process left. And if they had one last thought, they might think, well, yeah, it's bad, isn't it? But at least no one laughed at me, right? What does it matter? It doesn't. What matters is making people aware, not making people believe it. That's up to them. Making people aware of what's going on all around them. Because I know from my personal experience, when people are made aware of it from this other angle of looking at things, and we're only skipping the surface here, of course, it makes so much sense of the world that the official story of the world doesn't make sense. Information, valid information, is very powerful. And like I say, people can go, oh, no, my bubble won't have that. But you can't unhear it. You can't unhear it. And eventually, as things move on and things happen, it's like, that's what that bloke said. That's what that bloke said. And suddenly the bubble bursts and we're away.
And David practice is what he preaches. I said, you're all right to send me a text when you're on your way up here. Don't have a phone, mate. So right there. Now, we are just setting the table right now for the main content, which is David's book, The Trigger. So if you've been enjoying this podcast so far, we are just getting warmed up. I want to just go back before we get into the nitty-gritty of the day. And we've already talked about war, sets, creative destruction, reset, centralization of power. And this is linked deeply to the Middle East. So from post-World War II then and post-World War One, could you just give people a bit of a background on the Middle East, the Sunni, the Shias, and what what's going on there, that just to set the table a bit more for what's happened here?
Well, obviously the Middle East was a place where there's lots of oil, so it was always going to be focused upon because the cult, as I call it, and I'll explain more about that as we go along, which expresses itself through all countries, but expresses itself massively through what we call the West. They wanted control of that oil. But you really can't talk about the Middle East. And I have to say, you cannot talk about 9/11 without talking about Israel. And not Israel necessarily just as a country, and not Jewish people as a community, but talk about the cult that created Israel and controls Israel to this day, and has since created a vast global network of organizations operating out of Israel, including in America. You're not going to eat that, are you?
Little spoonful. Stop my stomach from rumbling.
What is it?
It's almond butter. Cashew butter.
Is it?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
You don't have an allergy, do you?
No.
Okay.
No. I have an allergy to looking at it. Anyway, I'm sure it's very good for you. Things that look horrible usually are. But you can't really look at the Middle East without looking at Israel and that which controls Israel. And as we'll come to, 9/11. And, there's a story which will take us through the Middle East and will take us into 9/11. And, I've been exposing for all these decades the web, what I call the web, global web of secret societies and semi-secret organizations, which comes out and plays out through government agencies and the banking system and all that stuff. We talked about that in the last video. But there is an element of the web that is very, very significant to modern events, and certainly significant to the Middle East and to 9/11. And it really started in the 17th century with a guy called Sabbatai Zevi, who claimed to be the Jewish Messiah. And he created a following that at one point, according to Jewish sources, what I'm going to say now is all from Jewish sources, because not all Jewish people think the same. That's another myth. And he had a following of something like 1 million people, which in the 1600s was absolutely fantastic. Anyway, he was operating in the old Ottoman Empire, which of course included what is now Israel. And it got to the point where the Sultan running the Ottoman Empire, the Islamic Ottoman Empire, wasn't having it anymore. And he said to Zevi, you convert or there's trouble, basically. So Zevi converted. And a lot of other people converted with him, and they became known as Donma or Donme, which is a word meaning to turn. And what they did was operate within the Islamic faith, outwardly as Islamic followers, but really followers. And I'm not even going to say followers of Judaism, because it wasn't even that. And this will become very relevant. All this is in the book in great detail. Because what this cult did, and it was an esoteric, what we would call satanic cult, basically, is it inverted Judaism completely. Just like Satanism inverts Christianity and inverts everything. It's the same thing, just different names. And so if there was a fast day in Judaism, in the calendar, to Sabbateanism, as it became known, it would be a feast day, So if Judaism said this was wrong, then it would be encouraged in Sabbateanism. It became an absolute inversion of Judaism. Zevi declared himself the Jewish Messiah, and then died. And then in the next century, along came a guy called Jacob Frank. Jacob Frank has been described by Jewish sources as one of the most terrifying people in Jewish history. But again, he wasn't Jewish. He was a Sabbatean, because he claimed to be the reincarnation of Zabbatai Zevi and the reincarnation of the biblical patriarch Jacob. And he took Sabbateanism into new depths of depravity and inversion, and the movement became known as Sabbatean Frankism. These Donma, operating in the Islamic religion while being Sabbateans, not even Jews, Sabbateans or Sabbatean Frankists, you follow that one strand of them through, and eventually they become the Saudi royal family. Another Sabbatean called Wahhabi, who married into that Wahhabi family married into the Saudi royal family, thanks to the British Empire, who brought them together. Wahhabi, a Sabbatean Frankist, was the creator of Wahhabism, the head chopping, arm chopping, ISIS extremist form of Islam, which is funded and protected by the Saudi royal family. They're not Islamic. They are Sabbatean Frankists. They are part of this death cult, this inversion. And so you have Saudi Arabia running the country on death cult lines, where people have their head chopped off, where people have their arms chopped off, where the big-time Sabbatean Frankist crown prince, Mohammed bin Salman, who was responsible for the horrific cutting up death cult ritual of Jamal Khashoggi, the Saudi dissident journalist, you start to understand also from this why the Saudi royal family, for a long time in the background, now more and more since the crown prince came to the fore in public, are so close to Israel. You'd think there would be absolute opposites, wouldn't you? Because Sabbatean Frankists hiding within Judaism, because this is what happened, particularly after Jacob Frank, is they started to take the infiltration of Islam and expand it into the infiltration into the Vatican and the Roman Church and Christianity. It's where Christian Zionism comes from. And to expand it into, which was not too difficult given their background, into taking over the Jewish community. And one of the most prominent inner core, that is, Sabbatean Frankist families, is called Rothschild. And this is why the Rothschilds were so central to the creation of Israel, because Israel was created as a Sabbatean Frankist fiefdom. What they did with the Jewish community is, and this is why I've said in that book, no one needs to read that book more than the Jewish community to see how they've been stitched up. What they did was start to construct a fake history to sell to the Jewish community, and a fake historic right to Palestine. Of course, they wanted that land. And they used the First World War particularly to get rid of the Ottoman Empire, which controlled what we now call Israel, then Palestine, as it's known to Arabs. And through the Second World War, very close together, of course, they then created a situation where they had the momentum to complete the project of what they call Zionism and take that land of Israel, which they've gone on expanding ever since, of course, into the officially occupied Palestinian lands. And there's a chapter in the book called Atlantic Crossing, where I show how this Sabbatean Frankist cult, which infiltrated the Jewish community, while the great majority, but while outwardly appearing to be Jewish and supporting Judaism and what they call Zionism, and they created a situation where kind of Jewishness and Zionism were the same thing. They're not. And they moved in on America, and they moved in on other countries, which is why America has such a vast network of Israel-serving organizations, which are massive, unbelievable funders of politics in America. Now, let's look at some figures here, which will kind of bring this to light. The Jewish population of the world is 0.2%. A lot of people will be shocked by that. They'll say, oh no, there has to be a lot more Jewish people than that. 0.2%. The overwhelming majority are in Israel and America. The people I'm talking about, who are not Jewish in the sense of the word, but this Sabbatean Frankist cult putting on the face of being Jewish, are a fraction of the 0.2%. In America, even though that's the second biggest concentration of Jewish people in the world, they are 2% of the population. And yet, and again, that Sabbatean Frankist cult will be a small percentage of them. Most of them will not even know there's a cult. And that from these tiny numbers, you have this enormous control of so much, not least through money. And when you follow that Atlantic crossing through, you see that this cult operating both out of Israel and within the United States was actually the central player in 9/11, and not 19 Arab hijackers who couldn't fly one-engine Cessnas.
Before we get to that then, how does the cult fit in with Sunni versus Shia?
Well, if you look at religion, and this cult, I'm talking about this aspect, Sabbatean Frankism, which came after the 1600s and has become a real major player in this web. But the web goes back further than that. And religion, again, we were talking earlier about perception. The idea is to control perception. So now they want to go and do it with the end game of technology and AI. But for a long time, and still today in vast numbers, one of their greatest forms of perception control is religion. I mean, you look at where do most Muslims come from? Muslim families. Where do most Jewish followers of Judaism come from? Jewish families. Where do most Christians come from? Christian families. Because from the moment they were born, it was basically all they ever heard, and so it became their reality. But if you also follow religions, see, it's not just controlling perception. You must keep the target population in conflict and at war with itself. Divide and rule, because while the target population is at war with itself, they are not seeing who's controlling all sides with the same hands on the strings. So you look at religion and you see the creation of a religion, and then you see the religion divided. Christianity went from Catholicism into the Protestant version and many other versions now. And you had the Sunni Shia division in Islam, and you've seen divisions in all these other religions. So you create a religion which is a belief system. And what is it? It's a postage stamp. It says, you will believe this, and if you go outside of this postage stamp bubble, then you're a blasphemer. All right, and you're not of the religion, and so it's all about perception, because they know that perception becomes behavior, behavior becomes society, and you see this everywhere you go. And there's divisions in Judaism. There's divisions in every religion, and so you play religions off against each other, but you also play factions within religions as off against each other, and we have a modern version of that now, which is called woke v non-woke. Woke, I love it. Obviously, they're not teaching grammar very well in the schools these days. I'm woke. I'll try being awake, mate. Much better. And what they've done with Trump, just a very quick aside, they wanted Trump in because they wanted a figure through which they could divide America. Trump is a figure, and when you read books by Marxist manipulators, they'll tell you. There's a guy called Alinsky in America, out of Chicago, who people like Clinton and Nancy Pelosi were kind of followers of, and he talked about the fact that when you basically want to divide a society, don't go for kind of gray, faceless corporations. Pick an individual, focus it all on an individual, make everything his fault, her fault. And that's what they've done with Trump. They brought him up so he can become this divisive figure. And what's happened is the Democratic Party has been driven further that way as a result of Trump, and they've created, if not physical, then certainly verbal civil war in America. This is how it's done. So dividing religions into factions is just par for the course. Dividing politics into factions, it's just the way they work. They want us divided so that we won't come together in unity and see what the game really is, and in the unity that it can be dealt with.
Divide and conquer, that has been used and applied for centuries. And it's still, like David's described, still strongly used today. Now, in the history of the world wars, post-World War II, we saw America was concerned about the poorer countries falling to communism. And the Russians invaded Afghanistan. The CIA are arming the Mujahideen, including bin Laden, and building a relationship with bin Laden. And there's some prime moving characters that I'd like to discuss here. My next question is the history of the Bush family and the bin Laden family, their relationship.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Father Bush and the Bin Ladens were very close through a company called the Carlyle Group, which was a big operation of manipulation. In fact, according to reports, Father Bush was meeting the Bin Ladens at a meeting of the Carlyle Group in Washington across 9/11. You know, there were many coincidences like that, I can tell you. But just very quickly, one of the things I point out, because you just mentioned Russia and what have you. One of the fascinating things that you find is that the Russian Revolution was funded by Sabbatean Frankists. It was funded by the Rothschilds, and it was funded by a guy called Jacob Schiff out of America, who was a Rothschild frontman, who was connected to Leon Trotsky, etc. And what you find, and you know, where the anti-Semitism protection racket, which is basically an expression of the cult, tries to attack me, is they say he says Jewish people were behind the Russian Revolution. Well, yeah, because they were, but they weren't Jewish. That's the point. This is the point. This is the thing that's missed. But they want people to say they were Jewish in the sense of that word, because then they can silence you and stop your meetings by calling you anti-Semitic. It's what I call the protection racket. It's not protecting Jewish people. It's protecting the cult and the Israeli government. Anyway, what you find is when you look at the official records of the Soviet Revolution immediately after 1917, of 556 leading positions, something like 400, it wasn't something like, it was 458 were Jewish. What did I say? 0.2% of the global population. But they weren't Jewish. They were Sabbatean Frankists. That's why they were operating with Rothschild money.
Why do you think Trotsky was assassinated?
Well, I don't know. There'll be many reasons that we don't know about. But the point is that this Russian Revolution was orchestrated by the cult. And what did the Russian Revolution do immediately it got power? Started, including Trotsky, who was Jewish, started targeting Jewish people. And this is another theme that makes no sense until you realize the existence of the Sabbatean Frankist cult, this inversion of Judaism that actually hates Jewish people, right? That's why it has no problem hanging them out to dry for its own ends. No problem. He hates them, right? So what you realize when you see this Sabbatean Frankist cult is why so many times when Jewish people have got to power, they've targeted apparent Jewish people. They've targeted Jewish people even more than they would anyone else. I mean, if you're a Jewish person today, I mean, including within the Labour Party, and you criticize Israel, you get attacked as an anti-Semite. You're Jewish even more vehemently than a non-Jewish person. So this is just a continuation of something that's been happening for a long time, because the people who are behind it are not Jewish in the sense of Jewish. They are Sabbatean Frankists. What did the Russian Revolution do? What we've just been talking about. It divided the world, didn't it? Massively. It still does to an extent. Oh, it's the Russians. But during the Soviet Union, the world was cut in two. And so much happened, not least the build-up of nuclear weapons, that wouldn't have happened without the Cold War, which was a creation. And, you know, I've talked about this in my books. You know, why did they drop those bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki when the Japanese, for all the horrors they perpetrated during the war, by the way, the government and the military, but why, after the bombs, did the Japanese surrender on terms they were already agreeing to before the bombs? Why did the bombs have to be dropped? Because they knew the Cold War was coming next. They'd already got into Russia with the revolution, and that was all moving. We got Stalin, who was a classic psychopath that these people use all the time. And they wanted this fear of nuclear war, which would divide and fear and frighten people. Now, there's a big difference between saying to people, these weapons, they're horrific what they do. Oh, really? Oh, yeah. Well, that's interesting. And actually seeing two of them go off and create that devastation and that mass killing. That has a different effect on perception. So because of Nagasaki and Hiroshima, that fear in the next period, which was the Cold War, all planned. This is a biorhythm chart we're looking at for the world. This happens, then that happens, and that happens. The fear of nuclear war was much deeper because people now had a visual perception of actually what it would entail. So all these things are happening and being manipulated. And so then you move into modern times where this cult is getting more and more control over world events. And as it does, something else is happening very clearly. And that is that the anti-Semitism industry, which at its core is a cult protection industry from exposure, by dubbing anyone that exposes the cult as an anti-Semite, when actually you're the opposite. You're saying, Jewish people, you're being scammed, look at it. The definition of anti-Semitism is getting wider and wider and wider and wider to encompass more and more and more that you cannot say without being called an anti-Semite, et cetera, et cetera. So now this new definition of anti-Semitism, which is being accepted by more and more people or institutions, which the Labour Party accepted under pressure because it's got no bloody backbone. It's now including criticism of Israel as being anti-Semitic. You know what I mean? So this is what's happening. And it's not protecting Jewish people. It's not the idea. These people hate Jewish people. It's protecting the cult from exposure.
So has it been attached to Jeremy Corbyn for the purposes of character assassination?
Well, look at the situation. You have a Conservative Party that will never say boo to Israel. In other words, boo to the cult. You've got a Liberal Democratic Party, which is, of course, neither liberal nor democratic, ironically, which will never say boo to Israel. You had the whole of the Blairite wing of the Labour Party who would never say boo to Israel. In fact, you'd never get a bigger supporter of Israel than Tony Blair. But you had a few people or a group around Corbyn initially who will criticize Israel for its abominations in terms of treatment of Palestinians. Because you can be racist against Palestinians, it doesn't matter at all. You never get come back for that. And so they wanted to mop up that. And so you had this hysteria about anti-Semitism in the Labour Party to get the Labour Party on its knees to complete the set, basically. And so now we have a situation where any criticism of Israel by anyone in the Labour Party is basically an expulsion. And my sons, we've got a new media platform called Icke, which we've just started. And my sons interviewed a Labour activist on that about a week ago, who is a supporter of some of the stuff that I say, and he pointed out that just sharing my information now is a suspendable offence in the Labour Party. And I'll just give you one example of how ludicrous it's become, and an example of what I said earlier, that if you're Jewish and you criticize Israel, you get the treatment far worse than a non-Jewish person for reasons I'm explaining, the cult. There's a guy called Chilson. He was born in Israel. He served as a conscript, as they do, in the Israel Defense Forces, and then stayed on and did, I think, some PR work, taking journalists around, showing them places that the government wants them to see. He served in a war in Lebanon in 1982, and then the pennies dropped of what was going on in terms of treatment of Palestinians and all of it. And he moved to Britain. And he's thinking, how do I, what vehicle can I have? I think he's at Oxford University, I recall. What vehicle do I have that I can express, my feelings about what's going on there? And he thought, well, the Labour Party. He's been expelled from the Labour Party for being an anti-Semite. He's a Jewish guy whose relatives were in Germany at the wrong time. This is how ludicrous it's become. Because it's not about protecting Jewish people from discrimination. It's about this protection racket, to protect the cult and its agenda. And to protect the cult's agenda, in many ways, more than anyone else, from Jewish people realizing how their community has been hijacked by this cult.